Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into the absolute grand finale of our exploration of this source text. This explainer specifically covers Chapter 3 of the 3 closing chapters, which is basically the author's final, overarching statement for the entire book. We're going to unpack this really provocative thesis about how modern society was subtly but deliberately rewired. And the text frames this not as some wild conspiracy theory, but as a documented strategy to reshape the very soul of Western civilization. It's a deep, challenging topic, so let's just jump right in.
So the book hooks us right out of the gate with this huge question: how did America become infiltrated? Not by tanks or military force, but by radical thinkers targeting the mind. The premise here is that while the nation kind of slept under the illusion of freedom and democracy, a totally different kind of revolution quietly burrowed its way into the culture. It didn't come through bullets or ballots, right? It came through books, boardrooms, and blackboards. The soldiers of this revolution? Well, they weren't generals. They were philosophers.
The author draws this really stark contrast between what the book calls the overt, almost masculine hammer of classical Marxism and the covert, much more subtle rewiring of cultural Marxism. You see, classical Marxism predicted that the working class would basically rise up against the capitalist elite in a massive overt revolution. But as the source points out, the Western working class seemed way more interested in raising families and going to church than, revolting. Frustrated by this, radical thinkers supposedly shifted their aim entirely. Instead of attacking economic structures, they went after cultural foundations. This new revolution wouldn't be fought in factories, it'd be fought in families, churches, and classrooms.
Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, Origins of the Frankfurt School, Tracing the Ideological Roots.
So let's map out the physical and ideological journey of the Institute for Social Research, which you probably know better as the Frankfurt School. Founded back in 1923 in Germany, its main purpose was to marry Marxist ideology with academic respectability. When Hitler rose to power in the 1930s, these thinkers fled to the US and re-established themselves at Columbia University. And by the 1960s, the text suggests their teachings had radically fueled the American New Left. The crucial takeaway the author wants us to grasp here is the claim that these intellectuals actually viewed Western civilization itself, its values, its traditions, its moral codes, as the true enemy that had to be dismantled.
To really get inside their mindset, just consider these words from Max Horkheimer, one of the primary architects of this whole movement. The source asserts that these philosophers viewed the horrors of the Third Reich not as some betrayal of traditional Western values, but as the logical end product of them. In their eyes, things like patriarchy, capitalism, and moral absolutism literally produced fascism. So when they fled to America, they didn't see it as a safe haven to protect. No, they saw it as the next battleground, a society deeply steeped in the exact traditions they believed caused authoritarianism in the first place.
Moving on to Section 2, Critical Theory and Deconstruction, which the book describes as a corrosive acid.
The book defines this core mechanism as critical theory. And according to the author, this wasn't a theory in the scientific sense, like meant to fix what was broken. Instead, it was this relentless method of critique aimed at undermining and deconstructing everything that held society together: marriage, religion, objective truth, you name it. The text actually paints a really vivid picture here, describing this philosophy as a corrosive acid. It's all wrecking ball and no blueprint, focused entirely on tearing things down without ever offering a clear picture of what a liberated society would actually look like.
The thesis posits that this deconstruction was aimed directly at the home. Just look at the words of Erich Fromm. The book uses this to show exactly how the traditional family was targeted. Fromm and his colleagues argued that father-led families literally trained people to conform and obey, basically conditioning them to submit to an authoritarian state. So in this framework, the traditional family was seen as a super dangerous mechanism of control that stood in the way of true liberation.
Theodor Adorno echoed this sentiment even more bluntly, as you can see here. The book's thesis really underscores that breaking down the patriarchal family wasn't just some theoretical classroom exercise for these intellectuals, it was viewed as an absolute revolutionary necessity. If the family was the germ of totalitarianism, as they claimed, then to save society, the family structure itself literally had to be dismantled.
Now, let's look at how these ideas spread in Section 3, Infiltrating the Academy, the Trojan Horse.
From the author's perspective, the post-war university boom in America acted as the perfect Trojan horse. Fueled by the GI Bill, a massive wave of students suddenly flooded into higher education. The book contends that the Frankfurt School thinkers embedded their ideas deep into the academic bloodstream during this time, which fundamentally shifted the whole goal of education. Instead of teaching students how to think, academia supposedly became an arena for teaching them what to think, turning professors into activists and universities into massive ideological echo chambers.
And that brings us to Herbert Marcuse, who the book identifies as perhaps the most influential missionary of this movement in America. It points to his concept of repressive tolerance, captured perfectly in his own words right here, as the direct philosophical ancestor of modern cancel culture and political correctness. Marcuse basically argued that true freedom required completely suppressing conservative or traditional views. If an idea upheld the status quo, silencing it wasn't seen as censorship. It was a moral imperative for the greater good. This is totally crucial, because the text argues these aren't just old mid-century academic musings. It presents them as the literal blueprint for the intense cultural arguments we see playing out on our social media feeds and in our workplaces today.
The revolution, the author states, was completely rebranded. Marcuse explicitly rejected the classical Marxist reliance on the working class. Instead, he swapped out economic class struggle for what we now know as identity politics. The new vanguard of the revolution became marginalized identities, the unemployed, and racial minorities. So the currency of the struggle was no longer economics, it was identity, which the book claims elevated victimhood to the absolute highest moral status.
So what does this all mean for us today? That brings us to Section 4, The Modern Shipwreck, Society Without Anchors.
The book points to a whole list of specific cultural foundations that have allegedly been deliberately severed, with the family redefined, gender fluid, truth treated as relative, and tradition simply labeled as oppressive. The roots that basically held civilization together have been cut. The result, according to the source, is a modern society that is totally adrift. It claims we're experiencing sky-high rates of anxiety, depression, and loneliness, all packaged under the guise of liberation.
Furthermore, the source argues that the entertainment industry was utilized as the ultimate delivery system for all of this. The architects of this movement supposedly realized that to alter a civilization, you didn't need to conquer it with an army. You just needed to produce its stories. Through sitcoms, movies, and pop music, subversion was normalized. The text specifically points out that humor was highly effective here. By making traditional virtue and fatherhood the punchline of a joke, it became embarrassing to defend them, which caused everyday people to kind of abandon their traditions without putting up a fight.
The author then paints this really stark picture of intersectionality, describing it as a system that demands a constant, never-ending state of deconstruction. In the book's view, this new order has literally no finish line. Once one battle is won, another boundary just has to be blurred. This creates a permanent, perpetual revolution that enforces a culture of intense tribalism, where actual dialogue is replaced with accusation and society gets locked into skyrocketing anxiety and division.
And finally, we arrive at Section 5, Recognize, Resist, and Restore, which lays out the book's path forward.
The author's concluding action plan in this final chapter is pretty straightforward. First, you must recognize the infiltration, meaning you need to understand the history, the tactics, and the ideas of cultural Marxism that we've mapped out today. Second, resist the ideological subversion. Basically, do not simply conform to the cultural drift or back down to the silencing tactics of repressive tolerance. And finally, restore the anchored truths. The book really pleads with its readers here to rebuild the society based on objective truth, strong families, and enduring virtues.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought. As we wrap up this grand finale of the author's overarching argument, a huge question really hangs in the air. Will society ultimately succumb to this century-long philosophical rewiring, or will it recognize the drift and find its way back to objective, anchored truth? It's definitely a compelling, if challenging, lens through which to view the massive cultural forces shaping our world right now. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive encourages you to look a little closer at the ideas operating behind the scenes in our daily lives.